That was the Governor of the Bank of England. Let's talk now with the man who's been credited as the author of much of what's come to be known as Corbynomics. He's a chartered accountant and tax campaigner. Richard Murphy, welcome to the programme. What do you say to the Governor that the idea of printing money to finance public spending would imperil the recovery, drive up inflation and in the end hit the poor and the elderly?
I don't understand what the Governor is saying. Let's be quite clear about it. One of the Governor's responsibilities is to deliver inflation in this country. He's meant to be delivering 2% inflation, and so far, at this moment, he's delivering nothing. In fact, we are at risk of deflation, and deflation could lead to recession. So right now, Mark Carney should be saying, what tools do I need to actually achieve my objective? Quantitative easing isn't working, zero interest rates aren't working. What is it that we can do? And so one of the ideas I've got is actually to create modest amounts of inflation.
How modest?
Which is 2%. That's what he's meant to be delivering.
And then you would stop the printing money?
Hang on a minute. There are two parts to what I've been talking about and Jeremy has been using as part of his economic policy. The first is a national investment bank. That would invest in real things in this country, things like social housing. I really find it very difficult to think how that is a danger to the economy.
No, I understand that, but it would be financed by the bank being instructed to buy the debt of that bank, correct?
Again, let's be clear. I've said there are three ways in which that could be financed. One, if we were in times like this moment, where there are people who are very keen to buy government bonds, then it would sell bonds in a perfectly normal way. A second would be potentially to sell it as an insurance, a pension product, through national savings and insurance, because a lot of people won't save enough at the moment. This is something they would understand. So it's a potential national savings product. And third, if we needed quantitative easing, if we come to another recession, and as Martin Wolf has said in the FT this week, that is going to be China's biggest export over the next few years, then if we come to another recession, and I think that's likely, we're going to need quantitative easing, the government has no other weapons in its armoury, then people's QE is part of the
programme. So the
programme.
printing of money to finance public spending would only happen if we were back in recession?
Well, it would only happen if there was a need for QE, which is when you need to create inflation, or when you need to create new money.
But that's not what
economy.
Jeremy Corbyn has told us. He has told us that he would finance a big increase in infrastructure spending, public spending and so on, by printing money.
No,
he didn't say only in a recession.
Well, I'm not sure where you've heard Jeremy say that, because I've heard him say very clearly at a meeting where I was present that he would, in normal times, fund with borrowing, and if there was a recession, he would use people's QE.
So if you were borrowing at the moment, you would add to the deficit?
Well, at the moment, I would add to the deficit, but let's be clear about that, Andrew.
Well, that is clear.
Yeah, absolutely it is. But we had 40 economists write for Corbynomics and 55 write against. And, every single one of them said, now is the moment to borrow because interest rates are low.
I have an economic background. I can always get 40 economists to say anything you want.
Yeah, but 55
nothing either way. Let's look at the substance rather than what people write letters to the newspaper.
Okay.
For this to work, you would in effect have to end the bank's independence, because at some stage you would have to instruct the bank to finance your public spending projects.
No, sorry, Andrew, you're wrong.
No, I'm not wrong. That's exactly
wrong.
what you would do. You've just said in a recession, that's what you would have to do. You would instruct the bank to do it.
Andrew, let's talk about how the Bank of England works.
Well, you're against the bank's independence, aren't you?
Hang on a minute. I think there are limitations on the bank's independence.
You're against it.
Let's also be clear about how central bank independence works now. The only way in which at present, quantitative easing takes place is when the Treasury authorises the bank to do it and says how much they may spend, on what, when, and the Treasury underwrites the risk. The Bank of England is not independent on QE now. There's no change in what I'm doing.
That's your view.
No, that's what the documents say, Andrew. That's what the letters of authorisation say.
I've read some of your documents.
And that's what the Bank of England Act says, Andrew. Let's talk about the realities, not the fictions that you'd like to put forward.
The Bank of England.
Yeah, well, the markets believe in fictions, Andrew.
Well, the markets are you. People will make their choice. If you explicitly end its independence, as you would do, you've already said on the BBC, you would see Mr. Carney go back on a plane to Canada.
Look,
if he bought my point, let me get my point to you. My point is that if you do that, there's a grave danger that sterling would plummet, that people would dump our currency, and you'd have to raise interest rates and there would be an inflationary danger.
I'm sorry, I simply don't agree with that. If a governor of the Bank of England turns around to the Chancellor and says, I will not do what the Bank of England Act 1998 says, which is support the government's economic policy, then that Bank of England governor would have to indeed leave their job. This is a choice about who runs this country.
If this was so easy, if you could just set the printing presses to go with no consequences to finance everything
But we are not saying
that
there's no
you want to do.
consequences.
Why has no government tried this? No respectable government tried this?
Well, look, are you saying that you shouldn't innovate? We are in a situation at the moment where we are likely to face another major
why
economic
has no respectable government tried to do this?
Let me finish my answer, Andrew. This weekend, Paul Krugman, a Nobel laureate economist, said, we are out of weapons to tackle the next recession. We need a new one.
I
the
understand
Telegraph
that.
said
But last time I
this
looked,
morning.
Paul Krugman is not a government. I've asked you,
The
if it was so
Telegraph said
easy for the government just to turn up the printing presses and build more hospitals and more railways and more roads with no inflationary or negative consequences for the currency, why has no government tried to do so?
Until 2009, we had never tried QE. We tried it, and to some extent, limited extent, it worked. But we discovered it didn't create inflation, it didn't create growth. Now we need a new twist on it to deliver the economic policy this country needs. Are you opposed to growth? Are you opposed to social housing? Are you opposed to putting people to work? That's the real question.
There are less respectable governments, of course, who have done it. Ones that Mr.
We're not going to get to Zimbabwe and Weimar Republic,
one that
surely,
Mr. Corbyn's actually rather fond of, and that's Venezuela.
Oh, look, come on. We are talking about a
Venezuela
government in a
has
totally
printed
situation.
money to finance its spending. Could you tell me what the inflation rate is in
I
Venezuela?
have no idea, and I'm not interested because there is no correlation between anything that happens in Venezuela and what we're
But
talking
your
about
man
here in
likes
London.
Venezuela.
I have no interest in that. I'm not his man. I am my man.
Let me come on to the second issue. That there's a 120 billion tax gap, you claim, between what the HMRC takes in and what it could be taking in if the law was being fully implemented on tax. And Mr. Corbyn has adopted that as a 120 billion tax gap. It's much, much more than the HMRC say. They say it's about 34 billion. IMF and the National Audit Office have said that's probably broadly
No, they
right.
haven't.
Well,
no,
they've said that the HMRC figures are good and robust. They've quibbled with them in parts and
Yes,
asked
they have.
for other methodology.
For the same reasons
but
that I have.
But also,
For the same reasons
the
that I have.
IMF has said HMR figures set a global standard. So let's just
Well,
say
they are
that
about the only person doing it. That's why it's a global standard.
every country in the Western
No,
Europe
they do not do
does a
it,
tax
Andrew.
cut.
You
But
are
let me ask
quite
you this.
wrong.
You've actually said it's not 120 billion now. 20 billion would be more realistic.
No, Andrew, I've said it's 120 billion, the same as
No,
the government.
in terms that what
Andrew,
could be
Andrew,
what
can we
could
just
be
talk about
captured.
Look,
You've said 20 billion is more realistic. I read it on your website.
am I invited here to talk? Because could I have a chance to do so?
Oh,
The
you've had
real
plenty of
number-
time to talk, so please
Right,
continue with
okay.
it.
I have said that the gap is 120 billion.
I understand that.
The recoverable part of the gap is 20
That's
billion.
what I said.
Yes, but that's exactly the
But
same
that's
as...
not what Mr. Corbyn's been saying.
No,
he
has been
he said,
saying
excuse me,
exactly
in his
that.
manifesto, he uses 120 billion. He did not use 20 billion.
He said there's a gap. He did not say, and now you're going to move on to the 93 billion, I presume, and say he's going to cancel
No,
all
we
those
won't
as
have time
well.
for that. Let's just
But
keep to the
point is,
120.
no, Andrew,
Do you
he's-
think that actually, realistically, you could get an extra 20 billion?
Yes,
That's your
and
argument.
that's what Jeremy Corbyn, as far as I've heard him say, is also saying.
But he
and
doesn't say
clearly
that.
said
I read his manifesto. He doesn't say
Well,
that.
I
He
didn't
uses
write his
100.
manifesto. He
Well,
points
but
out
you
there's a
dine
tax
out
gap.
on advising him.
I did not write his manifesto. The first time I saw it was the night before it was
Let me
launched.
just say, if there was 20 billion that was
there
easy
is
to
20
get,
billion.
well, no, in your view,
Yes.
there is. Easy to get. Out of the 120 billion that you say is the total, that is only your figure. Almost nobody agrees with you on that, but that doesn't make you wrong.
I think a mutual respect would be helpful.
That doesn't make you wrong. I'm just saying
No.
it doesn't make you wrong. Why would previous governments not have gone for that 20 billion?
It's a very good question. And I think in 2005, when Gordon Brown merged Customs and Excise and the Revenue, he wanted to cut staffing. And the policy has remained in place ever since. And we have the absurd situation that in a recession where we have every party says is a hole in the government's finances. We have reduced the number of staff at the
But we're not
revenue
in a
by
recession
40,000.
We're not in a
Well, look,
recession.
we still have a deficit, and everybody says
Yes,
they want to
that's true.
close it. And there's been a reduction in the staffing levels at the revenue by over 35, nearly 40,000 numbers of people now. We are sacking our debt collectors at the time we need money.
But
My
why
argument
would
is,
Gordon
let's
Brown not
change
have
our
gone for that 20 billion
But
if it was
hang on.
there?
First of all, there wasn't a tax gap measure by anyone when he started this process. 10 years ago, this issue was unknown. I did the
I've got
first
the
tax gap
HMRC
estimate.
published a tax gap in 2004, 2005. It was 38 billion.
Their figures were extremely
was.
rough, and there was not at that time
There
on the
was a tax
methodology we're
gap.
doing now.
I just
and nobody
think
recognised
people
this.
watching this, given the Gordon Brown's attitude
so my
to tax and spend, is that if there was an easy 20 billion to get out of your supposed 120 billion, if it was that easy, governments would be doing it now.
Andrew, let me tell you some other things about tax. 10 years ago, nobody told us that we could crack over tax havens, and they have. 10 years ago, nobody told us that we could actually get large multinational companies to talk about their tax responsibility, but now they are. 10 years ago, nobody thought that we could reform taxes in the way we're going to now to actually find the information that might be available. And let me give you a simple example of how we might collect
briefly,
some of that
please.
money. Right now, we ask tax havens to tell HM Revenue and Customs all about who owns companies, UK resident people who own companies there, what companies they are, who are the directors and everything else. We don't do that in the UK, and 1 million companies in this country do not submit tax returns a year. If they did, I reckon that's 12 billion of the missing money for that one measure alone. It's simple, it's straightforward, it's very low cost, we can have the money. Let's get on with it.
What do you make of this? Is this the way forward for Labour?
Well, I was thinking, if you put in a manifesto that there's a tax gap of £120 billion, people reading that manifesto are not economic experts. That figure then says, ooh, £120 billion we could get back. So I do think it's misleading unless you write these things really carefully. It's a figure that kind of hits you, and then that's what people kind of think about all the time, you know. So I don't quite pick up your argument that that's the gap and that's not what we can get back, because people don't think like that.
Look, I think that it would have been wiser to have made that clear in that manifesto. I didn't write it, but I think it would have been better if it had said that.
How close are you to Mr Corbyn on advising on these matters?
I know Jeremy Corbyn. I have done for a decade. I have no formal appointment to him. I'm not a member of the Labour Party.
Would you like one?
If Jeremy wishes to make me a job offer at some time and it's interesting and it suits me and my family, I would certainly consider it. But that's true of others as well.
Well, if he's watching,
Let us know.
stay by your phone.
I'll let you know.
Richard Murphy, thank you.